I want to go over open market operations in the Fed, and I want to kind of explain the role of the Fed with regards to open market operations in their place. This unit, understanding what the Fed is and what the Fed does and the role the Fed plays is really important. And we need to think about the Fed as being separate, outside the money supply. They're very much part of the economy. They help steer and guide the economy. They regulate banks. They control the money supply. But when they buy and sell bonds, they are adding money to the U.S. economy and removing it. So I created kind of a line of division here. Everything to the right, these poorly drawn banks, this is in the U.S. economy. This is in the money supply. And everything on this side, the Fed, we're going to say is not in the money supply. So what we'll do is we'll first go over buying bonds. I'll do this in green. So when the Fed buys bonds, like anybody else buying anything else on the planet, when you buy something, you take money and you exchange it for a good and or service. In this case, the Fed will be selling, will be giving money in exchange for bonds. So that's money traveling into the U.S. economy, into the money supply, and bonds from banks where they buy it from are coming outside. And the Fed, as we said, has like 49% of U.S. debt. They have $11 trillion of debt under asset. They're doing okay for themselves, and they don't mind having more bonds or selling bonds either way. Their goal is, their second main purpose is to control the money supply and interest rates. So when they buy bonds, they send money to banks. Now banks have more money, which means the federal fund rates goes down because there's more supply of money, which means it's cheaper to borrow money from bank to bank, which means it's cheaper for you, the non-bank public, to borrow money from a bank. The second thing I want to go over is selling bonds. Like anything else, when you sell something, you give something up. In this case, the Fed is now giving bonds up, and you are getting money out of it. So when the Fed is selling bonds, they're giving bonds to banks, and banks are giving them cash, which means money is actually leaving the money supply. So the Fed would decrease the money supply to raise interest rates. Now these banks have less reserves in their vaults, which means supply shifts, the price of money, interest rates go up, and it becomes more expensive for them to borrow from each other, which means it's more expensive for you to borrow for them. This is what the Fed would do if they want to slow down the economy, decrease aggregate demand, which, surprise, surprise, is what's happening right now. It's March 11th, 2019, and the Fed has been for the last 2 years raising interest rates because we are now what we would economists call an inflationary gap.